The Waves of Tech is the down-to-earth tech podcast for you, your family, and your friends. We remove all the complicated, drawn-out explanations of technology and simply talk about how technology is influencing every element of our lives, from social media and the cloud to tweeting and mobile communication. We talk tech in a different way. So plug in your devices and listen as we get ready to ride the Waves of Tech.
On episode 415 of The Waves of Tech, a remote Amazon tribe found via drone, commercial drone use, Facebook Watch launches globally, and disrupting the home sales marketplace. The Waves of Tech is powered by modernlife.network, modern issues, modern discussions. Well, Steve, how's it going today, man?
I'm actually doing well. Today is actually Labor Day. I believe that's correct. Labor Day, right?
That is true.
Okay.
Yep.
I get all these holidays mixed up.
There's a bunch.
There is a bunch. We're actually kicking this off a little early so we can enjoy the remainder of our holiday, but I'm doing well. A lot of things are coming up in the future of podcast and some of the other events that we're involved with. So we got a lot to talk about today.
Yeah, we do. We keep rolling along here on the Waves of Tech. We have International Podcast Day scheduled for September 29th and September 30th, where we're going to have 30 plus hours of live broadcasts celebrating the power of podcasting. And Steve, we have 18 different countries represented, from podcasters from all over the world to come share their story, their message, their expertise, and just the state of podcasting to some degree in a variety of these countries. So head over to internationalpodcastday.com. Encourage you to check out the speakers and the schedule. There's going to be something over there that you love. Well, Steve, let's dive into the conversation. It was curious because I know you're heading out to Vegas for a drone conference this weekend, and I remember a couple weeks ago that I came across this great MSN article that talked about how there was a drone that had footage that captured a reclusive Amazon tribe, and I kind of wanted to dovetail what you were going to talk about with this. And this mysterious reclusive Amazon tribe actually had no contact to the outside world. They were actually discovered for the first time via drone footage. We'll have a link in the show notes. I definitely encourage everybody, if they haven't seen it, to go out and check that out. But it's actually incredible footage. It shows what appears to be a member of the tribe walking across a clearing, and this is in the far western, the far west of like northern Brazil, and he's carrying a bow and arrow. And the clip was shot, of course, drone view from a bird's eye angle. And Steve, at first I thought this was really cool. And then I thought, man, that's really intrusive. But then I started reading about why the Brazilian government has been trying to track these indigenous and reclusive populations. And I didn't realize that there's actually a Brazilian governmental protection agency that revealed that they want to track these isolated communities because they're part of a protected group. And so by them going out and capturing footage and figuring out the dimensions, I mean, this territory where this population lives is about almost 33,000 square miles. That's a large portion of any landmass. And it's actually a larger area than the entire country of Austria, to kind of put it in perspective for you. And so what this government agency is doing is going out there and identifying and locating them to find out different ways that they need to protect their indigenous population, either from, urban development, protection of the environments in which they live in. So Steve, I kind of went back and forth. I was like, man, this is so cool. Modern technology allows them to find these people that don't want to be found. Then I was back and I was like, well, these people don't want to be found for a reason. If they want contact with the outside world, they're going to find a way to make contact with the outside world. Let's not disrupt that. And then to layer into the mix here, where this government agency is going out and trying to track them to find better ways to protect them, I thought that was a really cool use of technology and where we are currently with, sort of the need for information. A lot of us still consider that we need to be ultra connected, with work and everything. And we often forget that there are still these isolated groups and territories within the global realm that want to be reclusive, that don't want to be part of the modern society. And that's completely fine. And so what they're trying to do now is they're trying to determine the tribe's ethnicity. They're trying to determine the tribe's language. They have yet to identify them by name, but it's these images and these graphics and these drone shots really demonstrate some power and really allow the Brazilian government to focus on how to protect these groups in the future. So I definitely will encourage everybody to check out the show notes. We have a great link, and it's quite interesting, Steve, because it kind of throws you back to almost like the 14, 15, 1600s when you look at this.
When you first sent me the link, I took a glimpse of it, and I thought, this stuff isn't really going on in 2018. I mean, everybody is on the internet and concerned about net neutrality. Well, that's definitely not true. We are finding that some of these very reclusive locations of tribes still do exist. And it's actually very remarkable. And I wrote you back and I said, man, that is really cool. I wish I had been the drone operator. And you wrote back and said, I'm not sure it's right. Should they be exposed this way? And it was that kind of discussion that you and I had, and I had to think about it, as you did, and flip-flop back and forth. After digesting it myself, I think I'm kind of under the thought of, I'm not sure I like the government doing this. And the reason is, by attempting to pick up on those various points that you mentioned, actually then open them up to the new world, our world. It's by them identifying something's going on and some things like that. Should we not let what is be? I understand the protection aspect, but probably for thousands of years, Dave, they've been doing just fine.
Yeah, the agency that I mentioned from the Brazilian government, they actually said that they found about 107 isolated tribes throughout Brazil, and they often do take the photos and the videos of them, and they said that this is a really good way for us to learn more about the isolated communities, the way of living, their choice in lifestyle, and of course that, as I mentioned, equips them to protect them more. And they said that this tribe, some of the tribes took over 30 years since some of them made last contact. And there was an individual from the agency that came out with the Associated Press and said that the reason most of these tribes actually isolate themselves from the outside world as we know it is mostly due to past traumatic experiences, whatever that may be. Whether that's a taking of the land, perhaps that is, some sort of, unwanted exchange with individuals or government agencies. And they said that most of the people they talk to are really aware, they're very aware that cities exist, but they choose to live outside of one. And he said if they really wanted to contact the outside world, they would seek out ways to communicate with us to do so. They just don't want to. So I think, Steve, I'm on the border. I understand. I definitely want the indigenous populations, the reclusive Brazilian natives to live the life in which they live, but I also understand the need to learn how to protect them. And the easiest way right now to do that is utilize drone technology. And I think it's probably the most unaggressive way to do it because you're not essentially marching into their camps and their homes to take videos. This is a really, I guess, less impactful way of getting to know these people. So, yeah, it's kind of cool. It's kind of intrusive, but it's also, I understand the need behind it as well.
So since you brought all this up with drones and, some of the utility, you mentioned that I'm going to enter drone next week in Las Vegas to a drone convention where I'm going to, attempt to seek out a lot of the newer technologies that have been brought in by the industry and, some of the great keynotes and whatnot that are go on there at Interdrone. But what kind of sparked this is that it has been 2 years now since the implementation of the FAA's Part 107 of the FAA regulations, which deals with the commercial aspect within the United States of drone operations. I got to say, quite a bit has changed within the last 2 years when it comes to commercial operations within the drone space. And I would say good and bad, because it is a technology that is truly needed within the commercial aspect of business or law enforcement or whichever use case that you want to identify. But let me take it a step farther. So when in 2016, when the regulations came out and people began testing for commercial drone operations, which I did, and the 24 calendar month expiring of licenses has now come up for renewal. I did take my renewal certification last week. But that aside, when it comes to the safe use of drones, I think the commercial operators are very professional in doing a lot of right things. We still have a lot of issue within the hobbyist space when it comes to drones in terms of improper use and things like that are still being worked on. But let's look at where part of the industry has really grown and become responsive to, I think, the great utility and purpose of what drones are actually about. And since the past 2 years when we look at waivers that the FAA has granted, which are anything that you want to do which is outside the regulations of Part 107 of the FAA regulations, you need a waiver from the FAA to be able to do those kinds of things. It could be flying at night, it could be flying over people, it could be flying in certain kinds of prohibited airspace. You need a waiver. And one of the most granted waivers by the FAA over the past 2 years has been from first responders. And I'm really tickled to honestly see that number, that those type of operations have had the most success in getting waivers granted for the purpose of what they're using their drones for. Now let's take case in point. California wildfires have been absolutely devastating this year. And this year has also been a great influx of drone utilization in fighting forest fires. Caveat, we're not talking about recreationalists that are flying their drones into these restricted areas causing problems for aircraft and personnel. Those are the no-nos, and they need to stop. But when we're talking about the authorities utilizing drones, it's really cool because they can send up drones that can go see aspects without having to put firefighters in risk to go evaluate something. They can look at heat indexes. They can look at vegetation. They can look at many aspects using, i.e., thermal radiation and various other types of camera systems that can allow them to look through smoke and detect many things that are better in preserving the resources that they need to fight these wildfires. They don't have to send firefighters to a location that we really didn't have to. It's not that great a threat where this threat is of a much major substantial priority where we need to apply our resources. So what I'm trying to say is that the new regulations are still, being massaged and worked out, but I think the overall utility when it comes to the commercialization and use of drones in very many aspects, to include power line inspections and all these kinds of things, are great. But the FAA has fallen in tune with being responsive to the needs of first responders in the use of drones, Dave.
Yeah, I think it's pretty impressive where the commercial drone industry has gone, as you mentioned, over the last 2 years with 107. And by and far, like you said, the first responders are the operators out there that are being granted waivers, followed up by a few government agencies and entities, which, Steve, I'm wondering if that is part of the first responder, because most of the first responders in this case are government entities. But also we have the academics, we have some platform manufacturers, and a number of other people that didn't identify themselves with a specific organization that are receiving it. But it's great because we know here in California and also some of the other states, Steve, that were mentioned as far as requesting the most amount of exemptions were those that reside in California, followed by Florida, Texas, Colorado, and Illinois, mostly associated with, as you mentioned, emergency response or any sort of other need to do that, whether it's fly in certain airspaces, if you want to operate beyond the operational limits, such as speed, distance, visibility, as defined in Part 107. You also, of course, have conducting flights over people. You have flight without a visual observer. There's a lot of different waivers you can receive. And so it's interesting to look at those states, Steve, and kind of look at perhaps what was going on over the last 2 years. I mean, we know that California obviously has had a number of wildfires, and that continues to be a common occurrence here. Texas had Houston and the flooding, and they've had a number of issues there. I can't really speak to Florida. I assume it's probably associated with the hurricane as well. But Colorado and Illinois, perhaps even some firefighters and some other emergency response. But all 50 states and Puerto Rico have used these waivers, and it's working, Steve. And yes, the downside is sort of the universal availability of these drones is making the recreationalist, the hobbyist, more and more dangerous when it comes to flight patterns, when it comes to flying over people and recording people. There are issues with flying within certain airspaces, and we've talked about on the podcast about having manufactured kill switches in a variety. We've seen them shut down airports over in the United Arab Emirates. We've seen them hit Ferris wheels up in Seattle, Washington, here in the United States. But I'm glad the commercial space is working so well right now. And as you said, a few tweaks. The government's going to learn, just as the operator is going to learn, what are the parameters, what are the waivers, what sort of different restrictions, or what restrictions can we loosen up a little bit as they learn about how this industry works. And I will say, Steve, most of the time we talk about how government is slow to react to a lot of this. Yes, it took a little bit of time for the rules and regulations to develop, but in your opinion, is this Part 107 doing its job as they intended, and is it giving the operators enough flexibility to really operate how they do? Because I feel like they are, but from a drone operator perspective.
Actually, it's a really good question, Dave, because prior to Part 107, commercial operations with drone was a total different, I'm going to call it segmented method and authority and licensing process by the FAA with the 333 program. But let me kind of see if I can do it this way. I can tell a difference, honestly, with issues they have probably had based on the initial test from 2 years ago and the recurrence test that I just took last week. And in that, a lot of things have changed in terms of the emphasis they put on certain things. And the number one thing, because I could tell by how many stinking questions there was, is related to the United States airspace system. When we're talking the different classes of airspace and what are the limitations and what you have to fly within those confines, it deals with the security of people, places, and things. There's more structure around appropriateness of where you can and can't do specific things. The other thing that I think has changed over the past 2 years, and I think we're going to see more and more regulational changes come down the road, is based on some of the restrictions of, for example, flying overnight and some of these things, that over time, I think those will become less and less restrictive, especially based on the amount of exemptions that we're seeing for some of these organizations. The other thing that it has allowed is to allow more and more individuals to be able to get involved with the commercial side of the drone industry, because prior to, there was no way to do it.
All good information, Steve, and I love it because you're in the space, you're working as a commercial drone pilot, so you're in the bowels. You're figuring out what you can do, what exemptions to request, what waivers to ask for, and it's really cool to hear that as far as, because often we see these roadblocks and these regulations, but you're seeing some movement within the space, which is cool. And I love that you're going to be going to Interdrone this week, and you're going to meet up with our good friend Rick out there. And I'm glad you're able to go and check out the latest, the largest drone event in North America. Thousands are going to be there to really be at the center of what's going on within this drone revolution. If anybody wants additional information about that, check out interdrone.com. And Steve, I'm really looking forward to next week when we get on this podcast and hearing about your experiences when it comes to, ones that are using it in public safety for inspection in the business realm. How are they using drones in, development and hardware? And, we've seen that they're using it in agriculture and construction and mining and surveying and mapping. There's so many different industries that drones are being, clearly used for and saving a lot of money, but also keeping people a lot more safer and companies a lot more profitable. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more from you in the future on that. As much as you and I love talking about drones, let's switch pace a little bit here and talk about Facebook Watch. And Steve, I'll be honest with everybody out there listening right now, I did not know Facebook Watch was an actual thing that you can find on the Facebook app. And Facebook Watch, for those that don't know, and I had to do some own research on it makes sense, but it's an on-demand video platform, and they launched sometime about last year, but they kept it domestically here within the United States, and they just announced last week that they're going to be launching their video platform globally. And so they're, in an attempt to take some of the viewing eyes off of Netflix and YouTube and, the other sort of Hulu, Amazon Prime, all the video streaming sphere that's out there in the competition, they actually revealed that they're going to be expanding their Facebook Watch to publishers and viewers from around the world. And so, Steve, what this is, it's no different from YouTube or Netflix or Hulu, Amazon. They're starting to broadcast their own slate of original programming from last August. There's a couple of duos of shows that kicked off. They have dozens of new programs, from the dramas to comedy, reality TV, talk show, sports. There's a lot. And I guess they're dedicating about around, I can't remember the exact number. I want to say 500,000, but that seems way too low. Maybe it was 1 billion. But they're trying to push this out globally and try and make it available to those outside of of the United States. And Steve, as we know, there is a lot of demand for original programming. We've seen the success with Netflix. We've seen it with Hulu, Amazon Prime. We even see people from YouTube, because that's individualized original programming. But the real problem is that Facebook Watch really hasn't caught on with many viewers yet. And we'll have a great link, a Forbes link in our show notes that you can look at. But there was actually a survey that went out, and 50% of the adults that were surveyed had never heard of the company's Facebook Watch service, even though they reported that it attracts about 50 million people each year. 24% of them said that they'd heard of the service but never used it, and only 6% of the people said that they actually check out Facebook Watch at least once a day. And so, Steve, I don't use Facebook specifically to watch on-demand programming, but I found it interesting when I went to the Facebook Watch option on the app. It actually collected and aggregated a lot more videos from the pages that I like on Facebook, which was actually a really nice feature. I wouldn't go there for the original programming because I don't use Facebook specifically to watch original programming, but I would go to Facebook Watch to get an aggregated one-stop shop to see all the videos and like-minded videos of the pages I like. You know, whether it's anything from the podcasting space, my favorite sports soccer that I watch has a lot of highlights, or anything that's there that I may be interested in on Facebook, they're going to aggregate all that and check it out for me. And so I don't know, Steve, how this is going to work with large media companies creating video platforms for people to go on Facebook. Obviously, there's a lot of independent producers out there that have a lot of content. I want to clarify, Facebook plans to spend about $1 billion on original programming, and they want to shell out billions more in the coming years because, Steve, we know it's a competitive space. We know there's money to be had with advertising. You're going to have eyes on your screen. You're going to be living within the app. But as far as expanding it and being a global competitor, I don't see Facebook Watch being that in the near future at all. But I find it interesting that even though it was heavily promoted and shared, I never once heard about Facebook Watch until a couple weeks ago.
When I saw your description and link in the show notes that we were going to talk about this, I go, oh, come on, Facebook. We already have a Fitbit. We already have Apple Watch. Why do we need a Facebook Watch? And then I opened up the link and I go,
I see where I'd never even crossed my mind. That's funny.
Oh, that's the first thing I thought of.
Yeah, that's great. I never crossed my mind.
Facebook Watch launches globally. Great. Okay, it's like an Amazon phone that flunked. And so I'm reading and I'm looking. I go, what is it? I have never heard of it. And while you were talking, Dave, I'm on my mobile app and I still can't find Facebook Watch. I don't know where in the heck it's located. It's one of those things that ends up being discovered. It's either nobody knows about it or everybody knows about it. And either way, I'm kind of left out in the middle of the field because I don't know about it. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure I really cared. Or I may have invested some time to maybe see if those kinds of functionalities were available. I have always had this thing, I'm just going to call it a thing, about these mega giants that continually are expanding platforms and services into multi-directions. And for me, I'm going to talk about me, it becomes confusing because, and I say confusing because I use your platform, your service for one thing and one thing only. And then eventually all this stuff kind of comes under one umbrella, dumps into one bucket. And I get to this point where I'm going, I have lost sight of really what I was using this product for. Now there is X, Y, and Z components going vertical, horizontal, diagonal, and I don't know what's what. I have had that issue with some of the past Google products that they have now defunct and got rid of. But my point being is, how do you know about this stuff? I mean, it never shows up in a feed. I never get an advertisement. It never shows up as anything. So how do you know some of these products and services are even there? And I'm still looking and I still haven't found it, Dave.
Yeah, I was really surprised. And now that I think back, when Facebook did an update, and they do, I want to say, it seems like every 2 weeks they're pushing an update through their app, which is fine. But I want to recall that at the bottom there, where you have kind of like your news feed, your options, your profile, they at one place had the marketplace on there. I want to say there was a tab there that was titled Watch, but I can't remember. That's the only thing that I can remember ever prompting within the app itself for me to check it out. And I thought I clicked it, if I recall correctly, clicked it and saw some videos that I just wasn't interested in, something that didn't really, go with my likes or my interests or anything that people that I know that I'm friends with on Facebook were following. It was kind of just this weird aggregate of videos that really didn't make sense to me. But you're right. How how can Facebook legitimately dump $1 billion in 2018 and 2019 moving forward into a platform that you and I definitely don't know about? And I will say, Steve, I'm on Facebook 4 or 5 times a day, checking notifications, sharing, posting. I run a couple accounts, pages. I have my own personal account. Good way to connect with friends and family, people in the podcasting space. So I'm on there a lot. And I honestly didn't know about this. And it's easier to find, if you kind of you go to your options, you can look at. I just don't see how they can be competitive in a space when they've been doing it for a couple years and they're announcing globally. And Steve, maybe that's where their market should be pushed more, is into the global space. Maybe not here domestically in the United States. There definitely are a lot of people that are on Facebook that are intrigued in reality-based cooking shows, anything from sports, of course, to talk shows, to dramas, as I mentioned, reality TV. So if they can kind of target one of those interests, one of those genres and one of those groups of individuals and, subscribers of that kind of material, it could be successful for them. But again, I'm shocked like you that this thing has been going on for a year and I've once never clicked it open until a couple days ago. So I don't want to dwell too much on the Facebook thing, but it's interesting how they've made a determination moving forward that we're going to dump a bunch of money, and maybe they're looking at improving it. Maybe part of that money is original programming with more heavily promotion and advertising for their product. But I don't know, at this point, I think most people are using Facebook for something differently than on-demand video.
Okay, I just found it. It wasn't fun to find, but I found it.
Yeah, you got it.
Top videos for you. Okay. Showing a guy chopping down a tree. Big deal. Some girl
Home
dancing on
improvement.
yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
Some girl dancing on her bed. Okay.
Grandkids.
Somebody trying to cross the street. I mean, this stuff's not related to me. To be honest with you, it looks like a bunch of garbage. But I'm not saying there is not valuable utility within here. Yeah, it's probably not for me. But, if anybody is really honestly using this and would like to send us a note, I'd like to hear about what you use it for and those kinds of things. So maybe I can get a little more educated and just not being a snob, about certain kinds of things with Facebook, because I am a Facebook snob, as most of you are quite aware. But so lend us your ear and let us know what you're using it for.
Well, Steve, I was listening to this new podcast that I found. It's actually based out of North Carolina, and I found it really interesting because there's one female and two guys that are on the mics, and they're just talking about the North Carolina technology scene, which is really cool because it kind of gets me out of the global tech conversations that I sometimes subscribe to, and it's really cool just to hear some of the geographic specifics that are going on there. And one of the interesting topics that they debated about was, which industry do you think technology in the future, and quickly, more like the next 2 or 3 years, is really going to disrupt? And they talked about the whole movie pass, where movie pass, it wasn't the producers, it wasn't the giant manufacturers and studios that are making these giant blockbusters that didn't like movie pass. It was the movie theaters, because they weren't seeing the return on their investment, and people were using movie pass to see multiple movies, for a low fee of like $20 or $25. And that was a really good illustration of one technology company coming in and trying to disrupt a specific industry. And so it kind of got me thinking a little bit, Steve, what was going to be in the future. I couldn't really come up with anything. And essentially, I found a great article on Wired.com, which kind of put that thought in here. And now there are going to be apps that you can have cash paid for your house. Steve, as you know, when you go to sell your home or even to buy a home, you are usually looking at anywhere from a 2-month to 6-month process, right? You got to have the appraiser, you got to have the real estate agent, you got to sign all the paperwork with the title company, all this stuff. But there's this one company out there that is willing to put your house up for sale, and they can say within 3 days or less, your house is going to be sold and you're going to have cash in your bank. And what they're calling it, there's a new category of companies called iBuyers, and that's exactly what they're wanting to do. They want to have sort of these revolving doors and these revolving house purchases where they just essentially take the house off your hands, and then they can either put them directly back onto the market, they can do the improvements and then kind of flip the house, which is a big thing. But the sellers, Steve, essentially what they're doing is they fill out an online questionnaire, and an iBuyer uses a proprietary modeling to assess the home's value, and then the company can make an all-cash offer within 72 hours, sight unseen, and iBuyer gets about 6 to 10% commission off the price, and then they can renovate, and then they can list the house again. And while that's happening, home buyers can actually browse and make an offer via an app for a new home because they have essentially all cash in the bank. And Steve, it's a really big departure from the traditional mortgage, title company, real estate, purchasing of what happens within the real estate market. And I don't know to what extent this is going to be successful. I do know that people perhaps in a big crunch, maybe they're moving out of state, or perhaps a quick job change that makes them, relocate within state, or maybe even a couple hours away. This could be a really great beneficial way. But the interesting part, again, Steve, is that they're having some big-time investors like Lennar, who's the nation's largest home builder. They've dropped $325 million into this company called Open Door, which is essentially a group of iBuyers. And then you have a venture capital firm called General Atlantic that is adding more capital and more venture capital funds into that. And it's quite interesting, Steve. There's another one called OfferPad. They've raised about $410 million. And this goes against the entire traditional listings and the whole traditional marketplace that we know of how to sell homes. So I just want to throw it out there. It seems like it could be a possible game changer within the real estate market. But the idea, I don't know the sustainability of it, sort of the debt to profitability that a lot of these Open Door and OfferPad iBuyers could have. But it's actually something that's quite intriguing that may interest some of our listeners, but also something that could essentially disrupt the real estate market in the future.
I personally don't have a problem with disruption. I'll tell you why. Because a lot of this stuff you just can't stop. And I think in the real estate market is probably one of the most traditional mediums that are still out there in the world. And I think as we continue to see technology evolve and people find innovative ways to tie in things to technology to make them simpler, faster, cheaper, more productive, and all those kinds of facets about it, that eventually you're going to see some of these more traditional aspects fall. Even in the real estate market, there are some areas that have fallen because of Quicken Loans. And I actually did a refi with Quicken Loans, although it's a little bit different than what we're talking about here. But it was very quick, painless. It was all online. It was so simplistic. Now they have, you've probably seen commercials on Rocket Mortgage. It's basically an app and boom, and those kinds of things. I think this one is going to probably take a while to mature, Dave, just because of some of the intricacies of the legal aspects of processing stuff for homes and real estate and all that kind of stuff. But I think it could be something that is extremely viable, and you sort of mentioned it, especially when people are trying to do real estate transactions, i.e. coast to coast.
Yeah, it's the more I think about it, I mean, you mentioned Rocket Mortgage, you mentioned Quicken Loans. There's a lot of new ways of refinancing. There's a lot more ways of processing mortgage loans. You don't have to go to the brick and mortar store or the bank to some degree anymore. I know there's some official paperwork that needs to be signed, but this seems like it could be a front runner for disruption in the future. I mean, Steve, typically when you're selling a house is because you're buying a new house, right? And the lag time or that space between, okay, we got an offer, okay, let's try and make a offer on another house. Well, that can't really happen until, there's just so many nuances that go on, right? Okay, you make an offer on a house and then something happens within escrow and now you have 2 mortgage payments, right? And this may limit some of that, I don't know, that concern, that stress associated with it. Now it adds a different layer of stress because if you have your house sold and bought within a 3-day period, they're going to want you out of that house so they can flip it around as quick as they can. So it's the concept is great, and it's interesting, Steve. I'm not completely sold on it. I see a use case for it in so many people's lives, but outside of the traditional real estate market where you get hands-on, one-on-one connection with a real estate market, or a real estate agent, that is, I think there's some benefit to having of it. I guess, Steve, if you're into the thing where just, I want my money and you can have the house, hands down, no questions asked, because I assume there's no negotiation with the price. That's what I'm assuming here, because they're using a modeling or proprietary modeling software to assess the value. I don't know to what degree you can debate and negotiate your selling price. For some people, they don't care. So I think there's a place for this in the space. it will take a while, I think, for this new sort of category of companies and iBuyers to really infiltrate and really take over the marketplace, because real estate agents are so good at what they do. They have a passionate group of following, and they really know not only, Steve, just the housing market, but they know the demographics around where the houses are, what the income level is, what the schools are like, what sort of companies and businesses and grocery stores and all that stuff is around it. And you're not going to really get that with an iBuyer. So there's a lot of different angles you can take with this, but I think this could be, as you said, a good place for disruption. I'm not opposed to it. I think there's a certain place and a certain person that's going to want to use this, and it's going to be not for everybody, of course.
I agree. I think there's very specifics in the relationship to who would use, something like this, house flippers, maybe somebody that's doing a corporate move, things like that. If I was looking for a new place within a city, for my family, I agree. A realtor is probably the best way, because they probably have schools or have kids that go to the same school and some things like that. From a realty, property management, investment kind of thing, this could be something that breaks deals left and right and makes people a lot of money. Dave, finally, it's hard to believe, periodically on this show, we like to send out happy birthdays. And this one kind of crept up on me. I hadn't realized it had been that long. And that is the Google Chrome web browser is 10 years old. And like many other things, because I'm just such a bullheaded tech guy, when Chrome was first announced by Google, I go, we already have 20 of them on the market. Why do we need another one? And of course, from inside Google, there's a different mindset. Do you know what we could do with our own browser? Chrome OS, there's ways of capturing information that others don't have. We have embedded integrated tool access to Gmail, calendars, go on down the list. Pretty smart on their point. So as time has evolved, there is in fact became a role reversal in Chrome and of Internet Explorer of years past. What do I mean? Well, it had been some time, and it still happens. I have some customers that are under this predicament, that local and many web-based applications and systems and processes were hard-coded to only work via Internet Explorer because of various webhooks, technologies, and some things like that, as where now Chrome is actually in that same boat. In fact, what the system we're using to record on right now is Chrome only. And I'm finding more and more of my customers that are going to web-based type applications that are only Chrome only. And regardless of HTML standards across the board and all this kind of stuff that we're constantly hearing about, there are still production level things that are being hard-coded to independent web browsers. And perhaps that's not the core of the story that we're really talking about, but it shows the progression over time, how popularity and some speed functionality and some things like that become core components of why people select special things to do, special jobs. And for the most part, if you'd ask anybody what browser they're using, well, Chrome is going to be it. I am still a Firefox user and will probably never switch to that, except for when I do certain things and it says, you need Chrome to use this. I'm not trying to make this into a web browser war discussion, but what it is about is Chrome being 10 years old and the amount of market space and share that they have accumulated in the past 10 years with their browser. I think because of simplicity, because on add-on capabilities, and developers really tagging into some of their core hooking ability to be able to do some pretty unique things on the web.
I think you're onto something, Steve. You said browser wars, and it sounded like a TV show, right? You're talking about cupcake wars, garage wars, storage wars, all that stuff, on-store wars, whatever's on TV now. Can you imagine like a browser wars and kind of see what developers can do within different browsers? I think that'd kind of be a cool little, maybe some original programming for Facebook Watch. What do you think about that? But it's interesting, 10 years old for Google Chrome. I typically use Google Chrome for everything. I used Firefox for a long time. But again, when it came to, as you mentioned, some platforms only are Chrome only. And so I sort of just defaulted over to there. I use it at work. I use it at home. I use it when I'm over at your house. And it's just great. And remember, 10 years ago, the big push that Chrome made was one feature that really set them apart from everything. That was speed. And of course, speed has an equivalent to efficiency. It has an equivalency to getting projects and work and browsing done fast, quick, right? And some of the early benchmark tests showed that Chrome had significantly outperformed the likes of Firefox and Safari and IE, of course. And, it simply loaded web pages faster, and you can tell. And it felt right, Steve. It felt snappier. It felt more efficient than some of the quote unquote legacy browsers at the time. And, I can't believe in 2009 we had some things called legacy browsers. That's pretty crazy to me. But it has turned Google into its own sort of, obviously we know what Google does. They collect information, they collect data, they pull, your search histories, and they can use all this data and they can use it in advertising, they can sell it. And that's really created another outlet for Google to become who they are today. And it's quite impressive, Steve, to see where it's gone in 10 years. And I'm not sure exactly what version we're on now, maybe 63 or 64, but it continues to be my browser of choice. And it's not only because I don't like IE or I don't like Firefox, it's just I find myself gravitating towards it. I used Microsoft Edge for a couple months too, just trying to see if I cared for that, because it was bragging that it was 33%, faster than Chrome and more efficient. I didn't really like the user experience with that. So it's cool, Steve. Every year we come back on this podcast and have a happy birthday. And it's happy birthday to Google Chrome because they've earned a spot within the browser space. They've become competitive. And as you said, they've marketed themselves as some applications can only be used as Chrome. And it essentially, I don't know if manipulates is the right word, but it kind of gets you into their ecosystem and you kind of get sandwiched right there and you kind of forget what else is out there. So that's sort of my default browser of choice, but it's cool to look back at the history and kind of see where Chrome has gone over the last 10 years.
The longer we do this show, it really amazes me how quick these things kind of sneak up on us. Because, to be honest with you, in my own mind, I don't think of the Chrome browser being that old, although 10 years is not long ago. But it just seems like these things come on the market and away they go. There are many, 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 many different browsers out there. Some are still in existence. Some have gone by the wayside. But when we think of the utility and what the browser does for us, how each browser can be different and provide different results, and, oh, by the way, how it collects data, because to be honest with you, that's what it's all about. It really makes you stop and think that why don't we develop a Ways of Tech browser so that we can collect data on all our listeners? I mean, it's that kind of thing. I mean, that's kind of far-fetched and not very economical, but that's why these platforms exist. On the Mac, I think Safari is probably one of the worst browsers ever invented and still is. But there are people that use it, and for Apple, there is utility into people using it. Is it a game? Well, it's a game, I think, related to marketing and income based on service information. But in the final deduction, it all comes down to what's your preference. And I think we all have a different preference. I mean, I knew people that still use Opera. I don't know why, but people still use the Opera browser. So happy birthday, Google Chrome browser.
It's interesting you brought up Safari, because the only reason I use Safari is I have it on my phone just as a native app. And that's to what degree I use it. I just use it for searching. I use it for some links and some research, and that's about it. But anytime I'm on my phone using a browser, that's it. It's interesting how you said that. Really, Apple has not drastically improved or even put any effort into making Safari any better or more efficient over the last number of years, because they don't see it as a core business function or model in which to generate revenues. Apple is a very different company than Google. And so Google to come out and create Chrome in such the way and put its boundaries and put the focus on information gathering and search and, functionality with different platforms and applications, they've used Chrome as a core function to make money and to provide a specific level of service to their Google users, right? Because if you're using Chrome, you're probably using Gmail, you're probably using Drive, you're probably using Hangouts, you're probably using YouTube, down the list. And so it's just another element. And I don't think the likes of Microsoft or even Apple have really focused on that, because that's not really what their business model should dictate them to do. So I'm glad you brought up that point. And I actually forgot I use Safari, but I only use it because it's on my phone. Because one, I'm too lazy to download Chrome, and Safari works good enough for what I need it to on the mobile phone. So with that said, Steve, I'll give you the final word for episode 414 of The Ways of Tech.
It's very interesting you say that, because I really never thought of it that my mobile browsing and my personal computing browsing is different, and I use different tools in those two different aspects. But what a great show, Dave, today on Labor Day, where we kind of took a backseat look of where the commercial drone industry has evolved from over the last 2 years, looking at Amazon tribes, and is that a wrong or right thing to be doing with today's technology, and some Facebook aspects that we had never heard about, or at least I haven't, when it talks about Facebook Watch. No, I'm not going to buy one, but it is available in your mobile app. So interesting things, Dave. And so next week we'll be back with another episode of The Ways of Tech, and hopefully have some more interesting information from my trip. But all in all, we appreciate everybody that listens and our discussions and how technology of today could impact your life.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. And also, don't forget to head over to internationalpodcastday.com to check out our 30-plus hour live video event and celebration of all things podcasting. As I mentioned, we're going to have some great things over there. You can also find different ways of getting involved and also some of the benefits of being involved with International Podcast Day. Great events. Steve and I are happy and proud to bring it to you year in and year out, so we definitely encourage you to go over there and also use hashtag International Podcast Day on all your social media accounts, so we can connect and follow and see how you're going to be celebrating the day in your own way. The Ways of Tech is powered by modernlife.network. Thank you for tuning in, and don't forget to keep on teching.